Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be exploring a really pivotal moment, I think, in the history of the Indian subcontinent. We're diving into the Revolt of 1857, but with a specific focus on Uttar Pradesh. And we've got some really compelling sources that really bring this event to life. What I find fascinating is that it's often called India's first major uprising against British rule. And Uttar Pradesh wasn't just, a place where it happened. It was really the heart of the action.
Absolutely. The revolt really did echo across North India, but Uttar Pradesh was the epicenter. I mean, the most significant battles, the biggest political developments, it all happened there. And I think it's important to remember this wasn't just a few disgruntled soldiers. This was a huge, massive movement with people from all walks of life.
Okay, let's unpack that a little because I think the term sepoy mutiny, it can be a little misleading, right? Because when you look at our sources, you see a much bigger picture. You see those soldiers, but you also see local rulers who've been basically stripped of their authority, landlords struggling, everyday peasants. It was a really widespread resistance. So for you, what were some of the key underlying causes that you think really led to this explosion, especially in Uttar Pradesh?
Well, I think the roots of this revolt were really, really deep. Let's start with the political side of things. The annexation of Awadh in 1856, under what the British called the Doctrine of Lapse, that was a major, major turning point.
And just to remind listeners, the Doctrine of Lapse basically allowed the British to annex any Indian state where the ruler died without a natural heir. So it was really a way to expand their control.
Exactly. So you have to think about it from the perspective of the people in Awadh. This was a significant kingdom with its own rich culture, and suddenly it was just absorbed by the British. Their Nawab, Wajid Ali Shah, a well-respected leader, was removed from power. This wasn't just about land, it was about breaking trust, showing a real disregard for the people and their traditions.
It's like pulling a rug out from under someone. And you're right, it wasn't just Awadh. Our sources talk about how local rulers, landlords, all these people across Uttar Pradesh were feeling the pressure. They were losing their land, their rights, all thanks to these policies.
Right. And then on top of all that, you have the economic hardships. I mean, the British land revenue policies were just crushing, absolutely crushing. They imposed these really heavy taxes on both the peasants working the land and the landlords who owned it. So basically, you had people struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And if you look at cities like Kanpur and Varanasi, which were known for their textiles, those industries were getting hit hard by competition from British goods.
So it's like a double whammy. People are losing their land and their traditional livelihoods are getting squeezed. And then you bring in the social and religious aspects. It feels like that's where things really went from simmering to boiling over. Our sources talk about how the British were interfering with local customs and religious practices, and that caused a lot of resentment.
Absolutely. And the whole greased cartridge issue was like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Right, the cartridges for the new Enfield rifles.
Right. The rumor was that these cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, which was deeply offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. For Hindus, the cow is sacred, and for Muslims, the pig is impure. So this one seemingly small thing became this huge symbol of British disregard for their beliefs.
You can definitely see how that would be seen as a direct attack on their faith. And then, even within the military, there were already these simmering issues. Our sources point to pretty clear racial discrimination. Indian soldiers were paid way less than their British counterparts, even when they were doing the same, if not more dangerous jobs. That's got to create a lot of resentment.
Absolutely. And think about the demographics of the British Indian Army at the time. Something like 75% of the sepoys were from the Bengal Army, and a huge chunk of those were from the Awadh region, which is basically modern-day Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So when you have all these political, economic, social, religious, and military grievances all focused in this one area.
It's a recipe for an uprising.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the causes. Now let's get into the actual events. Meerut. On May 10th, 1857, that's considered the starting point. Can you take us through what happened there?
Well, Meerut was where the rebellion really broke out into the open. It started with those 85 Indian sepoys who refused to use the greased cartridges. They were court-martialed and imprisoned, and that sparked a much bigger reaction. The very next day, their fellow sepoys in Meerut rose up. They broke into the jail, freed their comrades, and crucially, they attacked and killed British officers.
And from there, it just spread, right? It wasn't contained to Meerut.
No, it didn't stay in Meerut. The sepoys marched to Delhi, which of course was this incredibly symbolic city, the seat of Mughal power. And when they got there, they proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar, the Mughal emperor, as the emperor of all India. Now, he was pretty old and didn't have a lot of real power, but it was a huge symbolic gesture. It gave the rebellion legitimacy and directly challenged the British East India Company, and that's what makes Meerut so important. It was the spark that lit the fire across North India.
So now let's move to Kanpur. This is where Nana Sahib, the adopted son of the last Peshwa, comes into the picture. What role did he play in the uprising?
Well, Nana Sahib really stepped up in Kanpur. He was able to bring together a large force, not just the rebellious sepoys, but also tons of local peasants who had their own reasons to be angry with the British. He became the symbol of resistance in Kanpur.
And Kanpur is also where that horrible massacre happened, the killing of the surrendering British.
Yeah.
Our sources indicate that this was in retaliation for British violence.
Yeah. After a long siege, the British in Kanpur surrendered on June 27, 1857. They'd been promised safe passage, but that didn't happen. They were massacred. And a lot of historians see this as a direct response to the atrocities that the British had committed against Indians in other places. It's a really dark chapter in the whole story.
Definitely. And we also see Tantia Tope and Azamullah Khan mentioned prominently in Kanpur. What were their contributions?
Well, Tantia Tope was this brilliant military mind. He was a big part of organizing and leading the rebel forces in Kanpur, and he really gave the British a run for their money. And later, he'd fight alongside Rani Lakshmibai in Jhansi. Azamullah Khan, on the other hand, was more of a strategist. He's a close advisor to Nana Sahib, and he's considered one of the key planners of the uprising.
So a real dynamic duo. And how did the British respond to the events in Kanpur?
Brutally. They eventually regrouped, got reinforcements, and then launched a counteroffensive. They retook Kanpur, and the reprisals were brutal. They executed tons of Indians suspected of being involved. Nana Sahib himself disappeared. I still don't know for sure what happened to him.
A real mystery. Now let's shift our focus eastward to Lucknow. Begum Hazrat Mahal really takes center stage there, right? Her story is really inspiring, a testament to her courage and leadership.
Absolutely. She was the wife of the deposed Nawab of Awadh, the one we talked about earlier. When her husband was exiled by the British, she stepped up to lead the resistance in Lucknow. She was a brilliant political mind. She got the landlords, the sepoys, and regular people all on her side. They were all united in their defiance of the British.
And Lucknow was also where one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the revolt took place, right? The Siege of Lucknow.
Yeah, the siege of the British residency in Lucknow. It lasted for months, from July 1857 to March 1858. The rebels actually did really well at first. They took over large parts of the city and forced the British to hole up in their residency, which was heavily fortified. But the British were determined to get Lucknow back. They sent in General Henry Havelock and then later Colin Campbell to relieve the siege. It was a fierce fight, and a lot of people died on both sides, but the British eventually won.
But even after the British retook Lucknow, Begum Hazrat Mahal didn't give up, did she?
No, not at all. She retreated to Nepal and continued to resist from there. She tried to get more support for the rebellion, and she never really surrendered. She died in exile, but her story is just incredible. It shows the important role that women played in the revolt. It's really inspiring.
Definitely. And we can't talk about the revolt of 1857, especially in Uttar Pradesh, without talking about Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. Even though Jhansi is part of Madhya Pradesh now, her story is so connected to everything we're discussing.
Oh, absolutely. Rani Lakshmibai is an icon, a legend. Her defiance and bravery on the battlefield made her a symbol of India's fight for independence. She refused to surrender Jhansi to the British and fought them with everything she had. She fought alongside Tantia Tope, that brilliant strategist we discussed, and they really challenged the British. Her death in battle in 1858 was a huge loss for the rebels, but her courage continues to inspire people to this day.
She really became a symbol of courage, independence, patriotism. It's amazing how much she inspired future generations of freedom fighters.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even later on during the independence movement, people like Subhas Chandra Bose would invoke her name, her spirit, to rally people against British rule.
It's incredible. Now let's move to Bareilly, where we see another leader emerge, Khan Bahadur Khan. What's interesting about his story...
Well, what's interesting about Khan Bahadur Khan is that he was already 82 years old when the revolt broke out, but he was fearless. He declared independence from the British in Bareilly and actually set up his own government. And that's really important because it wasn't just about pushing the British out. It was about creating something new, an alternative to British rule. It didn't last, of course. The British took Bareilly back in 1858, and Khan Bahadur Khan was executed. But it shows that there was this desire to not just resist, but to create something different.
A real statement of intent. And finally, our sources also mention uprisings in Balia and Azamgar, which seem to have been driven more directly by the concerns of the peasantry and local landholders. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, these were more localized uprisings, but they're still important. They really show just how widespread the anger against the British was, even in rural areas. In Balia, they even declared independence for a short time. And in Azamgar, it was the local zemindars, the landowners, who rose up, often with the support of the peasants who worked for them. These uprisings might not have been as big or strategically important as what happened in places like Meerut or Kanpur, but they show that this wasn't just a city thing. The desire for freedom was everywhere. And of course, the British cracked down on these uprisings pretty hard.
Which brings us to the British response as a whole. It wasn't pretty, was it? Our sources are pretty clear about the brutal suppression and the really harsh retaliation that happened across Uttar Pradesh.
The British reaction was brutal, no doubt about it. They weren't just trying to put down the rebellion, they wanted to crush it completely to make sure it never happened again. They used fear and force to reassert their control. They executed people suspected of being rebels, often publicly. They burned whole villages that were thought to be sympathetic to the rebellion. It was all about making a statement.
And our sources mention some particularly awful incidents that took place in Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah, one that stands out is the BBR massacre in Kanpur. Hundreds of Indian civilians, a lot of them women and children, were killed by rebel forces. It was a terrible tragedy. And then, after the British retook Kanpur and Lucknow, thousands of Indians were hanged, regardless of whether they had actually been involved in the revolt. And there's this horrible practice called blowing from cannons. They would tie rebels to cannons and blow them apart. They did this in Allahabad, Meerut, Kanpur, all over. It was all about instilling terror.
It's a dark reminder of just how violent this conflict was. So let's shift gears a bit. What were the lasting impacts of the revolt of 1857? What happened in the short term, and looking further ahead, what were the long-term effects, both in Uttar Pradesh and across India?
Well, in the short term, the revolt was the end of the Mughal Empire. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last emperor, was arrested and exiled to Burma. It was also the end of the British East India Company's rule. The British Crown took direct control of India, which was a huge change. And of course, there was the immediate crackdown. A lot of people were executed or imprisoned.
In the long run, how did this event shape the fight for independence?
The revolt of 1857, even though it failed in the short term, it really inspired the Indian nationalist movement. It showed that it was possible to resist British rule, and it helped create this sense of Indian identity, of a shared struggle. The Indian National Congress, which was founded in 1885 and became the main organization for the independence movement, was directly influenced by 1857. And leaders from Uttar Pradesh, people like Motilal Nehru, played a big role in that. And of course, you can't forget the impact on Gandhi. The sacrifices of people like Rani Lakshmibai, Begum Hazrat Mahal, all those who fought in 1857, they inspired Gandhi's movements for non-cooperation, civil disobedience, all the way to the Quit India movement. And those movements, they led to independence in 1947.
It's really amazing to see how this one event had such a ripple effect. It's clear that Uttar Pradesh played a huge role in this really transformative period. It wasn't just a mutiny. It was a full-blown uprising, fueled by all these different factors. It was a time of incredible bravery, of incredible sacrifice. Yeah. And it left a mark that wouldn't be forgotten.
Exactly. The courage, the resilience, the sacrifices of people like Nana Saheb, Begum Hazrat Mahal, Rani Lakshmibai, Khan Bahadur Khan, and so many others, they really laid the groundwork for what would come later. Their struggle might not have succeeded at the time, but it planted the seeds for what would eventually become Indian independence.
So it's a story about resistance, about fighting for freedom, about the long road to independence. And for our listeners, I think the question is, how do you see this first major uprising against British rule shaping what would happen almost a century later? What lessons can we learn from it today? It's a really powerful story, one that I think we can all learn from.